Please join me in our Chalice Lighting words. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, hopes and needs. Sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
Primary school teacher, and the older I get, the more I am struck by how primary literature fits so much of adult life. So I came to share one of my favorite books with you today, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day by Judith Viorst. Now there aren't pictures in it, and I'll hold it up, but you in the back, you won't need pictures to know what's happening. The words do it beautifully. I went to sleep with gum in my hair, and now there's gum all over. And when I got out of bed this morning, I tripped on the skateboard. And by mistake, I dropped my sweater in the sink while the water was running. And I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At breakfast, Anthony found a Corvette Stingray car kit in his breakfast cereal. And Nick found a junior undercover agent code ring in his breakfast cereal box. But in my breakfast cereal box, all I found was breakfast cereal. I think I'll move to Australia. In the carpool, Mrs. Gibson let Becky have a seat by the window. Audrey and Elliot got seats by the window too. I said I was being scrunched. I said I was being smushed. I said, if I don't get a seat by the window, I'm going to be carsick. Nobody even answered. I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At school, Mrs. Dickens liked Paul's picture of the sailboat better than my picture of the invisible castle. At singing time, she said I sang too loud. At counting time, she said I left out 16. Who needs 16? I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I could tell because Paul said I wasn't his best friend anymore. He said that Philip Parker was his best friend, and that Albert Moyle was his next best friend, and that I was only his third best friend. I hope you sit on a tack, I said to Paul. I hope the next time you get a double-decker strawberry ice cream cone, the ice cream part falls off the cone part and lands in Australia. There were 2 cupcakes in Philip Parker's lunchbox, and Albert got a Hershey bar with almonds. And Paul's mother gave him a piece of jelly roll that had little coconut sprinkles on the top. Guess whose mother forgot to put in dessert? It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. After school, when we picked up my dad at the office, he said I couldn't play with his copy machine. But I forgot. He also said to watch out for the books on his desk. And I was careful as could be, except for my elbow. He also said, don't fool around with his phone. But I think I called Australia. My dad said, please don't pick him up anymore. It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. There were lima beans for dinner, and I hate lima beans. There was kissing on TV, and I hate kissing. My bath was too hot. I got soap in my eyes. My marble went down the drain, and I had to wear my railroad train pajamas. I hate my railroad train pajamas. When I went to bed, Nick took back the pillow he said I could keep. And the Mickey Mouse nightlight burned out, and I bit my tongue. The cat wants to sleep with Anthony, not me. It has been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. My mom says there are some days like that, even in Australia. Anthony's mother let him know that everybody has no good, very bad days. She also could have let him know that days like this change and that other people can help. And that is one reason we come to this place, to offer help and to receive help when we have our terrible, horrible, no good, very bad times. And we don't even have to move to Australia. Let's join together, stand if you're able, with hymn number 348, Guide My Feet. Good morning again. Let's begin today with the title of this little talk, Lemons and Scraps. How many of you have used or at least heard these cliches? If life gives you lemons, make lemonade. If life gives you scraps, make a quilt. Do any of you have any variations on this, if life gives you cliche? Anybody? If life gives you sour apples, make a pie. And you catch the meaning of this. These cliches try to deal with the problems of being human, but so often they're so simplistic. And I've begun to find them annoying. They don't hold any help that's useful to me. One reason is that these sayings assume we know what the end is and how we can get there. A second reason for my frustration is the long time between lemons and lemonade, between scraps and a quilt. I don't want to wait a year to make a quilt. Now, I know a bit about this distance between something bad and using that distance to make something better. So let me move to the personal journey portion of the title. It's a story, and the main characters in this story are Wayne, my husband, me, and our daughters, Liz and Margaret. It was a glorious, hot, sunny day on August 12, 2003. Liz and I had driven to Massachusetts to mow her lawn, and Wayne had gone to Newark to work more on Margaret and Bill's garage roof. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Wayne had finished laying down the new plywood and covering it with tar paper, stapling that down tightly. He reached to put in one more staple, and Liz and I finished the lawn and some weeding and trimming and headed home about 2:30. We enjoyed good conversation and restorative silences. We got to Phelps about 6:30, and Liz called her boyfriend Brigham. His brother answered and said, you better talk to Brigham, who said, you better talk to Margaret. That's when life changed. That's when we learned that Wayne had fallen off the roof in Newark and was at Strong Hospital. 2 fast showers later, we were on the road. Liz drove while I created a numb bubble in which to exist while we put in the distance. At the hospital, the rest of the family met us in the lobby and told us Wayne was still in surgery and we couldn't see him that night. We decided to get dinner at a nearby restaurant, and the rest of the story came out. When Wayne leaned to put in that last staple, the roof jack had given way and he'd fallen about 15 feet, landing on concrete. He had tried to break his fall reflexively, snapping both wrists. That wasn't enough. His hammer fell on the concrete, and his forehead hit the hammer. The drip edge of the roof had cut and pulled his lips. Margaret saw him fall, but she didn't see him land, thank goodness. She rushed out and met a neighbor who had also seen him fall. The neighbor called 911 and held Margaret. Of course, that was just when Route 31 through Newark was being replaced. So Wayne got a helicopter ride to Strong. He couldn't enjoy it because of all the morphine he'd been given. The next morning, I found my husband in the brain trauma unit at Strong. He had fixators on both wrists, something I'd never seen. A fixator consists of 3 rods, metal rods. 2 of them screw directly into the bone, and there's a third that bridges that gap and is screwed together. It holds the bone in place while it heals. And of course, a fixator allows the rest of the limb to heal too. Wayne had a plate put in here, so there was an incision. This was a compound fracture, so there was blood and bone. And they just put a fixator on this wrist because. Wayne's forehead was stapled together, as was his torn lip. There were still blood spatters on his forehead and roofing dirt where he hadn't been washed. And he was on a ventilator. The nurse came in and asked if he could move his feet. He did. I found out that he'd also fractured his skull. They couldn't use a halo because of the damage to his face. And he most likely had a concussion, just a minor problem. He also had an incomplete spinal cord injury, another minor problem, I thought. I didn't know whether to laugh with relief or scream with pent-up emotion and strange things being done to my husband. He spent 15 days in Strong and was transferred to St. Mary's for rehab. He spent 10 weeks there with a dedicated and compassionate staff. The first staff member we encountered was at supper that first night. Wayne asked if somebody was going to feed him, and she said, "Do it yourself. It's part of your therapy." Well, we were taken aback, but that became our mantra. Wayne, do it yourself. It's part of your therapy. Even now, when he asks me to go to the kitchen and get his pills, Wayne, do it yourself. It's part of your therapy. After St. Mary's, we drove to outpatient therapy near Unity Hospital 3 to 4 days a week for 6 months. Wayne learned to walk again using crutches. And that spring, at home, he progressed to driving by himself and even walked around our block with no assistive devices. Now, I was woefully unprepared for any of this. I was a meek, accepting woman who revered doctors, who questioned nothing medical. I hated the high school biology unit that dealt with the nervous system, memorizing only what I needed to get through the regions. I had never taken physics to learn about levers and counterweights used in moving a big body. And I'd become a teacher so that I wouldn't have to deal with patients and anything on their bodies that was covered by pajamas. But I learned fast. Perhaps the universe was saying, well, you didn't do it the first time, so there's another chance. I found things to get me through difficult experiences. For instance, I found a site online that offered free jigsaw puzzles. That became an effective metaphor, putting the pieces back together to form an understandable whole. I still use it. Humor helped a great deal, in the moment at first. Then the effects of laughter began to last longer. Christmas Vacation and Beverly Hills Cop and MASH reruns made me feel better. And before I knew it, I discovered that I had a sense of humor. I was more in control of my emotions in this way than before. Norman Cousins was right. Humor is healing. He's the one that came back from a heart attack by laughing. Do you see the beginning of a quilt? I slowly became assertive, asking tons of questions, doing research so I could ask more questions, gently pushing Wayne to exercise more, swearing at stupid drivers to let off steam. Can you hear the lemons in these sentences? Can you also begin to hear lemonade? Here's another helping of lemonade. I became an activist. It has become possible because we can no longer travel. That means I'm in the area to march and stand and vigil and protest and support. I half-jokingly say that I did nothing during Vietnam, but now I'm making up for it. It wouldn't have been possible if circumstances were different. This is absolutely wonderful lemonade. Two other things help a great deal. Coming to understand grieving and letting my friends help heal me. I came to realize that a lot of my suffering came from grieving our losses. I found that we grieve not just precious people, but change and loss in general. We had to sell the 200-year-old house near Cooperstown that Wayne had inherited and that we were restoring. It was on a one-lane road, very remote, with no TV, and we loved that place. Much of our home in Phelps is now taken up by assistive equipment, and there isn't room for our daughters and their families to come over for a holiday meal or even to have a Christmas tree. I've also slowly lost my husband as he has struggled unsuccessfully to find a purpose in living this way. And the list goes on. I have spent so much time feeling guilty for feeling angry about all these things. So often I thought to myself, I can't do this anymore. How can I live the rest of my life like this? Then I came across my material on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's findings on the grieving process. She says that grief is the result of change, any change. Suddenly, I knew what was wrong and what I could do about it. I was perfectly normal, going through a perfectly normal and predictable process that would at least become bearable. It's a way we humans have of coping with difficult experiences, indeed, of growing through them and beyond them. A quilt. I found grief prevented overload and therefore stupor. Let's look at the steps. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Denial? Oh, yes. I very openly told myself that I just couldn't handle finding out in one sitting or two or three about all the details of Wayne's injuries. In the beginning especially, I refused to research all this online. About 6 years ago, he was also diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I retreated into the same refusal to learn about it. But this time I recognized it, and while I did nothing to learn just then, I knew that I was grieving again. Anger? You bet. I have been so angry at our situation and by extension at Wayne. Because I had been through some denial, I saw this anger for what it was, another step in grieving. I still get so angry, but now its episodes don't last as long. And I know I'm moving through grieving something else. Bargaining? Absolutely. Wayne, if you'd just exercise more, you'd improve and we could live better with this thing. Kathy, if you weren't so overtly angry, we could live better with this thing. None of this helped until I realized again that it was my grief. Depression has been a real problem for both of us. Each of us are taking the maximum of an antidepressant medication. It really helps me, but at some point I want to learn to live without it. Wayne is pessimistic by nature, a glass 7/8 empty, a real Eeyore. I find that really hard to deal with now. Then I remember that he has to put up with me, the Pollyanna of our relationship, the glass completely full personality. To paraphrase Eleanor Roosevelt, people are what they are, and life is easier once we accept that. Experience shows me that it's hard and takes time. Acceptance. It's coming in small ways. There are times now when I realize that Wayne's assistive equipment makes life easier and more free of pain. And that's more important than having a Christmas tree. I don't need to react all the time now to his expressions of doom. It's just Eeyore talking. I found that the process of grieving is not linear. I bounce around between the steps, having to go back and experience more anger and bargaining before I can move closer to acceptance. So far, I haven't been able to say, there, denial is over. Of course, Wayne's situation continues to deteriorate. So with each change, I must go back to the early steps and become aware of what my mind is doing and let the process happen for as long as it takes. It has been wonderful to rediscover my grief material and read it over again and again. I know now that I'm not a bad person. I'm normal, doing something normal, something my mind does automatically for my protection. I must honor that process and keep taking one more step through it rather than getting stuck. The other very important part of this saga plays out because of you, my faith community. Now, I know we're a very huggy bunch, but it has helped so much. That's another trite thing to say, but this time I'm on the receiving end, and it is true. You have hugged me, asked about Wayne, asked about me, sent cards, joked, remembered my birthday, visited us, met me for breakfast and coffee. Your thoughtfulness has made such a difference in how I live. Just the other day, another caregiver expressed her astonishment when someone asked how she was doing. She said, "I couldn't believe it. And I realized that I need care too." Caregivers tend to become invisible, even to themselves, because so much attention is focused on the person with the problem. We caregivers have two people to care for, the other person and ourselves. And you have cared for me without my having to ask. What a big part you have played in my life. My message today is that when bad things happen, they happen to everyone, even in Australia. I have learned that life doesn't have to stay bad. So when difficulty reaches out and touches you, I wish for you jigsaw puzzles or an equivalent metaphor, humor, something beyond yourself to become interested in, a familiarity with the grieving process so that you can use it to heal, good friends and a community to hold you upright with their smiles, words, help, and hugs. It all matters. May it be so, and may it be so. Amen.
Please lean on one another or grab a hand as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.